Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Don't Stop the Education series from the Sennheiser Sound Academy. I'm Tim Moore with the Sennheiser Relationship Management team, and I'm joined with my host, Andy Edgerton, also with the Sound Academy team. The Relationship Management team. We're all bringing you this from the Sound Academy, and we've got some great guests, as today we do our second episode focusing on live mixing, front of house perspective. The first guest I'd like to introduce is Branden Blackwell, who works with Lizzo, ASAP Rocky, Camila Cabello. Welcome, Branden.
Thank you.
And Brett Scoop Blanden with Lady Antebellum and Brett's Place Live.
Hey guys, how are you?
Welcome, Scoop. And I'd like to pass it over to Andy Edgerton, who is my co-host today, and he'll introduce the other two guests we have.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, from the European side, hailing from the US, but now in Amsterdam, we have PJ Harvey, who mixes Lord and My Bloody Valentine, doing front of house of them. Hi, Phil.
Hi, welcome everyone.
And also we have from Lincolnshire, Snake Newton, who is currently mixing Harry Styles and Duran Duran. Hi, Snake.
Hi there. How you doing, everybody?
So I just want to thank you all for joining us. Absolute stellar lineup. But if you could if we just go around the table and just in 2 to 3 minutes, if you can all just introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself. So if we start on my top corner of Snake Newton, please.
Hi. I suppose I should start with how I started a long time ago, over 30 years. I started as a musician. I was a bass player, and I had no idea when I started that people rented equipment out. I built a PA from scratch with my bare hands so that I'd get the band that I was playing in noticed for sounding good, because at the time I just thought everybody sounded pretty terrible. Every time I went to see a band, I just thought, oh God, this is dreadful. If I get my band to sound good, I'll get signed. But what happened was people from other bands started coming to me and saying, your band sounds really great. Can we hire your gear? Can we hire you? And suddenly I was getting so much more money and so much more work from this. And that's sort of how it developed. And then I moved to London to try and get out of that, to work in studio environment more. And really at this time we were experiencing sort of the downturn of the big studios, and it became more and more difficult to get work there. I got to a point where I was getting so much more work live again, because I did that on the side to finance my sort of wanting to work in the studio. And then eventually I just thought the immediacy of live, I was working on an album at Metropolis Studios, which is still there. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this is so boring compared with what I do on the road. And that was that. I never looked back. Went from mixing in clubs to mixing in arenas and stadiums in sort of 8 years. So I was pretty lucky.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And we'll stay up on the European side. PJ, if you could give us a little intro.
All right. Very similar to the beginnings of Snake's origin story. I started out as a guitar player and had a couple of bands, some punk bands I was into, and always did some home recording with the Radio Shack 4 tracks and two cassette decks to write music, and for the bands I was in, and we started playing live gigs, the classic Elks Lodge and all these tiny little clubs and strip mall warehouses, and we would hire a PA from our drummer, and then I basically started going with him on gigs that wasn't part of our band, and on the side. And then, of course, thinking that my band was actually going to go anywhere, we moved. And this was in started in Austin, Texas, then Corpus Christi, and then moved to New York City. And you know, of course, we're going to be big. Slowly hit the reality of the situation where we actually can't afford to live playing music. So I went back to Texas and took, there was a beginning, in the very beginning stages of the Art Institute in Houston, Texas. They had a audio production curriculum. So took that and did all right, I guess. It was just like a 2-hour, two-year course, and kind of just found myself in a little club there at the right time where the manager was completely bitching out the existing sound guy. And I had been there enough to, for the owner to know me and say like, hey, how about you? You run sound, right? You're out of here. You're hired. And my first week was terrible. It was completely sink or swim. Like, hey, is this mic on? Hello, check, 1, 2, and feedback everywhere. And I basically lived to tell about it, and started mixing shows there. Some regional bands as well as international bands came through. But got picked up by a band from Austin, Texas, and said, hey, you want to go on tour? And I was like, I have no idea what that means. Sure, sounds great. So fast forward, 28 years later, 28 years later, and I can actually do this for a living, which is still boggles my mind when I sit down and think about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's great. And let's jump over the pond to Blanden. If you could give us a little intro, please.
Yeah, Brandon Blackwell. I am based out of New Jersey. I started mixing, or quote unquote mixing, in church when I was maybe like 10 or 11 years old. And it was just one of those things where I didn't know what it was, but I thought it was super cool that, you know, you could move these faders and twist these knobs and get some decent sound. And so I took that and learned that, or did that job for a couple of years. And then I wanted to, you know, have more of it. So I ended up seeing a Sade concert when she was doing a world tour. And literally I mean, till this day, this is probably, you know, over a decade ago, I remember how great it sounded. It sounded just like the record. And I was like, I want to be a part of this. I think this is right when the profile first came out. And so I Googled it and I was like, you know what, this is what I want to learn. Fast forward, I graduate high school and I tell my parents that I want to go to Full Sail, which is a technical school. And, you know, I'm 17 years old when I graduate high school, and they are like, there's no way we're letting you go away to school. And I eventually convinced them to let me go. I go down there, destroy it. You know, I had a 3.8 GPA, had the best time of my life, learned so much. But I went home without a job, and that was not the goal. Like, I'm based in New Jersey, so I freelanced in New York City for a while. And when I say freelance, I mean a gig every month, and that was it. And then miraculously, I still don't know how it happened, but my mom's boss meets the musical director of American Idol, and they set up a meeting, and I meet with him, and he basically hires me as his production manager, or really an assistant, you know, making copies and all this stuff. And he does a show, and Shaka Khan is performing, and she just lit up the monitor engineer, you know, just a random house local guy. And, you know, I'm young, I'm hungry. I said, I can do this. And I stepped up. My first real monitor mixing gig was mixing monitors for Shaka Khan. And
Nice.
yeah, I mean, I'm the thing that got me was when she looked over, when it finally got right, and she looked over and was like, this sounds good, baby, or sweetie, or something. And I was just like, okay, we can do this. This is the real world. And then fast forward, I enjoy mixing front of house more, but I always thought that becoming a monitor engineer would get me to front of house. And now I've been kind of transferring over more and enjoying it, as I keep in my career. So, yeah.
Amazing. That is a great intro. Thank you so much for sharing that. Brilliant. Let's jump to Scoop.
Hey guys, I'm Brett Scoop Blanden, live in Nashville, Tennessee, originally from Tampa, Florida. It's kind of cool hearing that everybody had some kind of musical chops background. I was the drummer. Are we forming a band, front of house band, by the way? God, no, please. Anyway, I grew up a drummer, went to Berklee College of Music in Boston, and was in the MP&E program there. Moved to Nashville, Tennessee in, I guess, 96 with the hopes of being a big studio engineer. Served a lot of coffee, swept a lot of floors in studios at Masterphonics at the time. Eventually went on to manage Ocean Way Studios here in Nashville. So get some business chops and be around all the studio pros. Was second engineering in studios at the time. Left off and started my own small demo studio, and then got eaten alive by rent and technology change. So went back and became a corporate accountant for a couple of years. And I was at a bar one night, and one of my old session guys, session guitar players from my studio, said, "Hey, your old session band is going out on the road with this artist on Sony. They need a live sound guy, and they're having auditions tomorrow. And do you do live sound?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure do." And so I showed up at the audition after a heck of a hangover. Sorry, not embarrassed to say it, but I wore 2 different colored black shoes that day because I don't think I can see my feet. Anyway, had a rapport with the artist, which I think it all comes back to, and he took me on the road. And I learned real fast that it was very different than being in the studio. And I had some really great teachers along the way, some guys that I call friends and peers and colleagues now that really either kicked my butt or put me under their wing, early on. Lots of club gigs, still lots of studio chops. Been with Lady Antebellum for, I guess now almost 12 years, 12 years last week. And a myriad of artists before that in the live sound facet. So that's what kind of got me here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's incredible. What an array of talent we've got in front of us.
Very good.
Let me jump back to Tim.
No doubt. Scoop, has it been 12 years with Lady Annabelle?
Yeah.
Man, time is flying. I can't believe that. It seems like the other day when you called me to do that Shadazy gig for you.
And I think the last gig that I did before Lady A was covering that Jamie O'Neill gig for you at Coachella.
Yeah. Thank you. It was hot. I want to say something to the guests that we have out in the audience. We are getting your questions coming in, and we're going to be taking those, but we're going to get this conversation going a bit first. But we have our Sound Academy team looking at the questions, and we're putting a list together, and we'll start feeding those in a little bit here. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Andy.
Yeah, I think the obvious place to start is an initial building of a mix. How you kind of go around doing that? Have you developed a style or a template that you've become a certain way of working with? So I guess let's go back to Brett.
So how do I start? Really, I listen to the vocal. What's the artist that I'm working with? Primary vocal like. I'll just speak with Lady Antebellum specifically, since it's been over a decade and that's fresh in my mind. I can tell you that right out of the chute, the 2 principals of the 3 principals, the ones that sing the most of the time, the male lead is Charles Kelly, and he's got a really deep 330 area of his voice that the more warmed up he gets, becomes really pronounced in the 500s. So that frequency area is definitely where I want my goodie of my snare drum popping and rocking. And so I have to say right out of the bat, having nice vocal clarity in the vocals there and not competing with the snare drum energy allows me to kind of keep it rocking. Starting off, tune the PA, make it musical so there's nothing bumpy or swimming in the room. After that, listen to some music that you know and know well, walk around. In side hang scenarios, I tend to, once I get a good vibe of what the room's doing, I kill the front of house mains and I just listen to the side hangs and or 270s and see what's getting excited around the room a whole lot. I may find that something that I would have wanted to cut out of the mains is really an artifact of something that's coming out of a side hang or a 270 hang at that point, which, can be negotiated different ways. But once I get it tuned there, kick drum, vocal, and kind of build it up from there.
That's great. I'm going to go around everyone for this question. So let's jump to Snake.
Hi there again. I guess my MO has been a long time. I've been doing virtual sound checks. And I've been lucky enough to work with bands that afford me that sort of time where I can record rehearsals or previous shows I'll use and essentially tune the PA to the virtual sound check. But it also gives you the opportunity to work in a sort of hybrid manner of listening back to recordings, troubleshooting stuff at source, and basically getting a balance in the rehearsal room before you actually hear anything in a PA. It gives you an insight that you don't get in a loud room. I think you can throw a balance up, see how it works, and I would say again, the vocal is always the vocal. Start with the vocal, listen to what's coming down the mic. It's all very well starting with the drum kit, making it sound amazing, and then throwing up the vocal mic and going, whoa, my whole mix just changed so radically that everything that I've done up until this point is an absolute complete waste of time. So if you're actually, I think if you're in any scenario, really, put the vocal mic up and listen to the vocalist first. Because if you're going to need so much gain to get the vocal up to the level that you need it at, that it's going to do that to your mix. There's absolutely no point in starting the other way around and building a mix that sounds nice and shiny and then destroying it. You're much better off reverse engineering it and going, this is what I have to have. You cannot get away with not having the vocal at this level. This is the thing that people come to see. I do a lot of solo acts, and I'm very lucky to do a lot of really big acts, and it's their name on the poster. And I've had this interestingly with session bands where I've said, guys, I'm really sorry, but you could be on fire. And I'm not talking on fire in a playing way. I'm talking like you could be being incinerated. And a lot of the audience sadly won't even notice that you're being incinerated because they're all eyes on him or her. So the vocal is the thing. It's all about the vocal. In fact, people that know me really well will know that my sort of catchphrase is, "Can you hear the vocal?" And now you press next, because I'll snapshot the scene. And the way I mix, actually, the bottom line is that I started on automation very, very early, and I started on virtual sound checks in sort of about 2001. So I've been doing it a very long time, and really my gig is pre-program the band, have the band sit basically there, and my whole time is just sitting about the vocal, getting the vocal to sit. And it doesn't, I'm not saying that it has to be pushed right out front, but if you get the band to sound great with the vocal at the right place, then it really does become, your eyes are on the singer or singers. So that's my thing. And obviously with certain bands, so I've worked with Duran Duran for 17 years now, and all of their music is very production based. So all of the songs sound, the instruments have to sound very different. So the drums on A View to a Kill, say, are these huge, great gated reverb drums, and then the drums on Girls on Film are basically pudgy disco drums with no reverb on at all. And if you don't do those changes, then the song sounds completely wrong. But through that, you have Simon Le Bon's vocal, which thankfully is very, very strong. So to me, it's all about basically getting the band mix to sit under the vocal, and then just concentrate on the vocal for the whole of the show. But I'm lucky. I'm in that sort of world where I can sort of spend a lot of time on the band mix prior to actually doing the show.
Fantastic. Thank you, Snake. Let's jump to Branden. Can you add to that, please?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of people say I'm the younger gun. So the virtual sound check that Snake was talking about, that's my bread and butter. When I do have a chance to do band rehearsals, I first start with what I like to call a target curve on my near field speakers. Most of the tours that I do, we don't normally carry PA. We're swapping from PA, different sized rooms. And for me, the most important thing before I get into, how the kick sound, how the vocal sounds, is making sure that PA translates the same way. I normally have a systems engineer, but I enjoy tuning the PA myself. And, I start with getting a target curve first. That way it just translates. And so then if we're talking about from the beginning stages, most of my artists deal with tracks, very heavy tracks. And the way I like them stemmed out is everything that's from the record, I want completely separate. And then everything else that's added, the additional programming, whatever, additional backgrounds, I want it completely separate. And the way I start is by putting just the record up first. And then I put the vocal on top, just so I can hear what the crowd, what they heard on iTunes, what they hear on Spotify every day when they're in the car. And then I start to add in the programming, the band. If there is a DJ, I put them in under. I'm kind of like, I don't know who said it, or I think Snake said it, the fans don't know the band. They don't know the additive music. To be honest, like you said, they're not really looking at them. So I mix it so that the band is underneath the record and the record shines through. It's a little bit difficult these days. Some, MDs, they drop the record out so that you have to hear the band, separately. And that's where it's the fine art of having the kick that's in the record sound like, or having the acoustic kick sound like the kick that's in the record. So maybe that kick in the record isn't as low end heavy. Maybe that snare is more like a clap, but as soon as it disappears from the tracks, you need to seamlessly, run together. So, like Snake said, automation is my thing. I like to sit back and hit necks. I've gotten to the point where I've time coded a lot of scenes so that I don't even hit necks. I let the console do its job and I just ride the vocal. It gets, it's a little lazy, but you're consistent every single time. And then I get to focus on, more of the creative part of, the delays that I want to do, just something that makes it live. And that's kind of my approach, you know. The record is what the fans know, but it does have to be live at the same time, and the key is to find that balance between the two.
Fantastic. Great answer. Thank you so much. And last by no means least, PJ.
Every mix is artist dependent. Wouldn't say I have a template. I mean, once you get established with an artist, you develop a template, but it is definitely artist dependent. With Lords, it's definitely the vocal, you know, how that mic comes across. It's all about her, like my predecessors alluded to with their acts. My Bloody Valentine's complete opposite. It's total old school rock and roll. Start with the drum kits, get that throbbing, and then just move down the input list. And if anyone's familiar with the records, the vocal is mixed below the guitar, so it's pretty much the vocal doesn't have much impact except for the audience members saying like, "Hey man, I can't hear the vocals. Can you turn it up?" Like, well, you obviously don't know the band because this is how the man wants it. But yes, as far as, you know, tuning a system in a venue, try to find the room resonances and you know, massage the acoustic space as well as you can to make things as clear as possible. You know, that's pretty much it. It's kind of funny because I'm a little more old school, where virtual sound checks to me are the greatest thing ever, because it was fairly new to me. It's like, hey, wow, you can do this and actually hear your band without them on stage. Like, I never want to see the band for sound check ever again, you know? And I'll still use, I've kind of amassed a collection of tuning songs that I'll play, and to see how a system will react to it and how a room will react to it. Still getting used to the idea of being able to do virtual sound check and not have you know, someone in the band come over and it's like, hey man, you can't do that. Like there's fans outside around they'll hear it, you know. So that's always in the back of my mind, but of course it's an amazing tool. And even not playing it through the PA, like Snake alluded to, you can completely spot check things, take care of source issues with mic placement, or, you know, maybe a track hitting a DI too hard, so it's getting a little crispy, a little too distorted or something, overloading it. Yeah, that's pretty much kind of working with an artist, developing a template around that artist, and then treating you know, each acoustic space, trying to really do the best you can, whether it's a gymnasium, hockey arena, you know, tiny little venue, or the classic Elks Lodge scenario.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going to jump back a little bit. Oh, sorry, Tim, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, if it's okay, I was going to kind of jump on what Philip was just talking about there. It goes to one of the questions, and thank you guys viewing. We've got a lot of good questions coming in, but one of these comes to the use of the virtual sound check, but it leads me to the acoustics question. So obviously, the larger the venue, the more that virtual sound check can be helpful, but how do you deal with the acoustics in the room with your sources on stage and then getting the intelligibility and that type of thing when the room acoustics become a problem? Do you have any good strategies for that? Whoever would like to go first, go ahead, Philip.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure it was being directed to. Well, again, with I've got two completely diametrically opposed answers to that because of the artists I work with, which I'd like to think scratches, you know, two different itches of my personality. Where with Lord, it's all except for acoustic drum kit and her voice. Everything is tracks and DI signals. So the artists are all on in-ears, and there's really, once the sources are on stage, there's really not much that changes. Of course, the vocal mic plays a huge part in it, but I definitely don't feel it as being big of an issue as, say, for example, with My Bloody Valentine, where it's all about loud rock, as loud as you can, you know, hitting 110 or louder, and the acoustics of a space play a huge role in it, where it just, you know, especially the more live the building, there is a point where that building will collapse on you, and it just, everything turns into cacophony. So you have to kind of try to get as much as you can up until that level, and without, you know, breaching that going over that level where it'll just, you know, smack you back.
I think terminal velocity is a real thing. You know, I also think that stage volume and monitor volume, if you're not on in-ears, is a real thing. You know, recently there was a club in Nashville, and I went in there, and the club owner was like, I can hear no vocal intelligibility out here. These are songwriters, and the band's the band's drowning them out. And my comment to him was, I don't think it's the band that's drowning them out. And it was a younger sound engineer there, and he had the wedges so loud and so much 200 and 250 out of the wedge that it was just bouncing off the upstage wall and washing out any high frequency that could have been available from a poorly managed PA scenario. You know, Sydney Opera House is a perfect example. Put a guitar amp out. Put the guitar amps out in the hallways somewhere. Get them off the stage. This stage was meant to encourage acoustical energy, and so, you know, you can't ask guitar players to turn down because, you know, you lose that goodie. But sometimes they have to, or, you know, hot plates are a good answer for smaller places when you're really trying to get a vocal up, or get the guitar amp out of the room, or encourage the drummer to use a different set of sticks, depending on the size, once again, size room. You know, if you're playing Shepherd's Bush, you know, in outside of London, you know, it's 850s in the walls with just a big lever that's a throttle. You know, stage volume doesn't matter, and it's fun because of that. But when you get in these other rooms that are really live acoustical spaces, everybody has to do their part, including musicians on stage, monitor engineers if you're on wedges specifically. If you're the monitor engineer, make sure that 200 and 250 not only isn't abundant in the front of the box, but take a walk around the backside. You know, most point source boxes are really happy down there, and that's the perfect place to really sacrifice that vocal intelligibility.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Sorry, just to cut across there again, I would say working backwards. So if you've got a loud stage, you start front of house, you start with the vocal. And if you can't get the vocal over the band without the PA on, you've just got the PA off and apart from the vocal, and then you've got the band and the wedges raging, and you can't get the vocal over the top of it with any intelligibility, then you have to have a word with the monitor guy and with the band, because you've got nowhere to go.
Right. Now that's the question I was going to get. I was kind of going to Snake for anyone that wants to jump on this too. We always like to call that combat audio here in Nashville. But how do you guys approach that conversation? This is something I think some of the younger guys can benefit from. Is how do you broach the conversation with the offending musicians?
I'll say for me. Because I spend the time to tune the PA, I like to have my smart screen up, and I'll just mute the PA and see what the wedges are doing. Because I've been on that side, I understand how it affects front of house and vice versa. So I'll just throw little hints. Hey, take a little bit of 250 out of your wedge. It's, you know, like Scoop said, because, you know, it's easier to hear it, but if I can take a transfer, or not a transfer, but if I could take a screenshot of it and send it and say, hey, this is what your speaker is doing in the room right now. It's affecting me negatively. Do you think you can take a little bit out of it? Communication is like the key to it, especially with a monitor engineer, because you guys are a team. But I think definitely for me, using SMART and being able to actually give evidence to the engineer on the other side that, you know, this is what's happening. Can you make an adjustment? And vice versa. Like if you're in a small venue and there's a lot of slap off the back wall, and, you know, it's a little bit harder for out front, but, you know, if you have to turn it down a little bit, that snare.
Or if the stage is singing, you know, if it's a hollow deck, a lot of low end energy on deck, and you've got a really light vocalist, it's a real consideration that front of house you might not know.
Yeah. And so that, you know, that communication between the two is the key, you know. Yeah.
The other thing I'd say also is don't be afraid to be radical at front of house. I've done plenty of shows in small venues, clubs or whatever, where I've got the graphic and it's flawed, absolutely pulled down at 200, 160, 250. Just don't look at it and go, that's wrong. Listen to it and say, that's right. You know, there's so many examples of where if you're in a really small room, then you are not on your own as a front of house engineer. You're obviously meshing with front of house monitors and the stage sound. But it is a kind of a difficult, or it can be a difficult conversation to have with the monitor guy sometimes. I think a lot of us, as we, you know, get on in our careers, find monitor guys that we get on well, you know, really well with, and you almost have an innate sense of what the other guy needs. You know, I'll often ring up the stage and say, you know, second song in, after it started to settle down, is there anything I can do for you that'll make, you know, make life better for the band and for you? And often, you know, if, you know, in high volume environments, sometimes on, you know, Harry Styles, we'll get the downfills will be feeding back at 12K and we won't even know it front of house. So I don't take the hump when he rings me up and goes, it's going off at, you know, it's starting to sing at 12K. We can't even hear it out here because the audience is screaming so loudly. But the idea with the band itself is, I think it's dependent on what the makeup of the band is, whether the band is a session band or whether, you know, I had so much fun with Duran Duran in the early times when the original five were still together, but Andy Taylor had the loudest guitar rig I've ever had. I mean, 4 stacks of 12 with a Mesa Boogie cranks to the max, to the point where he could hold the guitar on the downstage edge and get infinite sustain, like 16 feet from the rig, you know, absolutely blazing. So that's a difficult one. And we did some corporate shows where you really had to address it. And we did one show where we had an orchestra behind them, and I had to go and say to him, look, I'm sorry, Andy, I know this is your thing, but there's nothing I can do about this. For want of trying, if you don't turn it down, it will ruin the show. And that's the way it is. And sometimes, you know, you've got to take a big deep breath and go and do that. And that's the way it is. Saying that, you know, you can't do that too often. You've got to hope that they learn. You know, but if they're a session band, you sometimes you have to go and say, look, your name isn't on the poster. I've done shows with you know, Robbie Williams in a club that holds 100 people. You can't have your bass amp or guitar amp or whatever at that level because we can't hear Robbie's vocal. And you have to hit him with that. Maybe not hit them, but brush them lightly. I think, you know, but in a smaller environment, you have to be aware there's a sort of synergy thing that has to go on to make it work. And that is really one of the most important things in front of house, I think, to get the balance right, to allow the band to breathe and allow the monitor engineer to do his thing or her thing, and you to find the way it meshes in. But again, always down to the vocal, I think, always goes back to, obviously not with, you know, My Bloody Valentine, and with the wall of sound thing, not so much, but, you know, pop, mostly these days.
But monitors are have a huge influence on everything. And yeah, I'm glad Scoop brought that up because it is a symbiotic relationship. I mean, backline monitors, front of house, it's all part of the same equation, right? So trying to get the best product to the listener as possible. And I mean, the approach, the radical approach with the graphic EQ, which Snake referred to, is exactly the same as having to take a radical approach with an artist, or you know, say like, not today, and hope that you still have a gig tomorrow. But you know, you hopefully over time, from doing this enough, you develop a rapport with your artist, and then are also able to kind of find gentler ways of breaking the bad news. But I think the more professional the artists are, the more they'll understand what the end result is and why changes have to be made, even though it might not, you know, completely rock their boats that evening potentially.
Fantastic.
So last thing I want to add, or one thing I want to add before we walk away from this, we could touch on this later too, but if any of this stuff that you're recording at front of house, because I'm definitely multi-tracking every night and definitely printing 2 mixes every night, I think that the broadcast consideration of this goes as well. You know, a loud drum set, you know, 8 feet behind a vocal mic makes management of that in post, makes any kind of editing, tuning, fixing, that kind of stuff really difficult for post engineers after the fact. So having a mindful consideration of like, hey, what is our end game with this? Is this just a front of house experience? Is this just a concert we're doing tonight? Or is this a concert that we're rebroadcasting to put on a DVD or a webcast, and we're going to deal with that in post? You know, that might be one of those opportunities where you bring that wedge volume down and you give an artist that doesn't typically use in-ears an option of having one in, or, you know, maybe it's a side fill component, just negotiating those dances a little bit differently if you're going to have a post opportunity with the event.
That's great. Thanks, guys. Really good tips there. We've got quite a lot of questions coming in now, but a lot of them are falling into certain categories. So we've got a lot of sort of beginner startup questions, and there's quite a lot asking about PA setups. So let's go back right to the very start. So a question from Ethan is, what was the hardest bit about getting started, and how did you overcome it to get your career pushed on to the levels that you've got to now? Does someone want to jump in with that one? If not, I'll direct it to Scoop, because I know you've been working with some students lately.
So what was rephrase the question? What was the hardest thing about getting started?
What's the hardest part of getting started in live sound, and how do you push your career on to the next level?
Well, I think Sal Greco, who used to be the chief engineer at Ocean Way when I was a studio manager there, when I had embarked on a journey of live sound, I went back and we had a few laughs and I said, what would you share with me as your most important tip or proverb moving forward? And he said, just remember, frequencies are notes. And I thought that was a really great bit of advice. I think that moving forward, getting into it, listen better. You know, every relationship I think I've had, there's been a Post-it note on the fridge at some point to me saying, listen better, listen better. I'm like, wait, I'm a sound guy. All I do is listen. I think that's just the number one thing if somebody's trying to give you advice. If somebody's sharing their mix with you, if you're out front listening to another front of house engineer mix, regardless of their tenure in the business or skill set, there's always something to hear. There's always something to learn. There's always something to put in your pocket. And sometimes listening, when we are focused, hyper-focused, or egocentric in a way, sometimes guilty, sometimes listening is harder to do. So that would be my buzzword in there.
Okay, cool. And another question, someone is asking, kick in and kick out, why have two microphones on the bass drum? Someone want to jump into that one?
That's a good question. Yeah, why? Again, if I can field it, I don't always use a kick in and out, but sometimes I do. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But basically, it's two different timbres of a sound that you can hopefully mesh together and together create a larger, more thumping with low frequency content sounds. And I mean, there are a lot of factors. It depends on so many things. Like I know a lot of engineers that really like to push the kick-in mic all the way up to the beater to get the extra click of the beater against the front head of the kick drum, and then inherently the microphones that are used, like the SM91 for a kick-in mic, is kind of has that character anyway. And I personally, what I like to do is try to get the microphone diaphragms as lined up as possible. When you do that, you kind of you have more reinforcement, and you don't run into phasing issues. Again, when you're talking about an inch here or there, it doesn't really affect the low frequency, but it also depends on the drum. So there's a lot of people that swear by kick-ins and outs, and then there's a lot of engineers that don't. I'll just say with Lord, since there's so many samples and trap drums and everything over the acoustic kick, we only use a kick out, and then for MPV we do use both kick in and out.
Okay, cool. And another question, I'm going to go to Snake here. This is more of a vocal one. Cardioid versus a hypercardioid for a vocal.
Depends on the problems that you've got with the vocal. The human voice is the most interesting and difficult to deal with instrument probably that you'll ever deal with. I guess it really does depend on how the person handles the mic, on the tonality of their voice. It's not just the polar pattern, but the frequency response of the mic, and whether you have wedges involved. I tend to go for tighter patterns on loud stages, just because you can do a lot with EQ, you can do a lot with the compression, you can do a lot with effects, but you can't do a lot about spill. That's the one thing that you really can't do much about. You've got plugins now like WNS or the Neve Portico bit of hardware or whatever that will reduce a reasonable amount of spill, but I'm very much into sort of creating isolation with as many of the mics on stage as I can. So generally speaking, I'd go for the tighter pattern. But obviously, again, if you look at the hyper versus a cardioid, it depends on whether you've got a wedge down on the floor behind it, or whether you've got a pair of wedges, because the pattern with a hyper has a deeper sort of reciprocal arrangement, shall we say, at the 180 degrees, whereas so it's not very good to have a hyper with a single wedge on the floor underneath it. You'd want the wedges spread out. So if you had a pair of wedges, then you'd probably be better off with a hyper. So yeah, there are a lot of questions to ask before you actually sort of make the decision. Normally I would say hyper, but again, you know, if you gave Michael Bublé a hyper, it would be a catastrophe because he's all over the place with it. You know, it would be like having the fader go up and down. So you want something with a wider pattern. If you've got somebody that pulls away from the mic a lot or moves their head around and it's on a stand, then you're really going to make yourself problems with a hyper. So you would probably want something with a more natural sound to the whole field, so that when you go off axis, it doesn't sound dreadful, which it would do with the more directional microphones.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think we're jumping to Tim, who's got a couple of questions over there as well.
Actually, I kind of want to jump back to the two other questions that you had, and one can be a really quick answer, and it was about getting ahead in your career, and it came from the perspective of how much of it was skill set and how much of it was luck. But I'd like to twist it a bit and say how much of it is skill set with gear and mixing, and how much of it is skill set with people. And have you had much of? Does either really play that big of a difference, or do you feel that they're equal?
Yeah, what's the equation out there? It's like 60% skill or 40% skill and 60% people.
Okay.
I would say that it's somewhere in the middle, definitely. Yeah. You've got to have equal. Okay. You've got to have it in spades, all of it. But I think it's got to be down the line. You can't have. I've seen guys that are so great with gear that never get a gig because they're absolutely obnoxious. I've seen guys that are wonderful with people that are dreadful mixers, and they tend to end up erring towards the technical side of things. I mean, there's a great amount. I mean, front of house mixing isn't the only thing that goes on at front of house. There's great techs. I know guys that are really amazing techs. I would give them a stadium gig tomorrow, and they'll say to me, I couldn't mix, I couldn't mix a 3-piece, but they'll give you a 150 box PA system that sounds stunning,
all the way up into the nosebleeds.
Yeah.
I would like to add to that question, just as far as my own personal experience with being in the right place at the right time at this little club, Fitzgerald's in Houston, if anyone's from Houston. But being in the right place in the right time, I was mixing monitors from front of house on a old Soundcraft 400B, and I basically had a week of, at this point I feel sorry for the performers that came through the club that week because it was so stellarly horrible. But I really, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get this, and I ended up taking a microphone and a cassette deck and pointing the like a 58 at the wedge and just boosting all the frequencies and recording them. So I kind of made my own feedback tone generator. I recorded these frequencies on a 31 band, and then thought about, okay, well, if I just keep listening to this, and like when I go to bed at night and get the subliminal programming happening, then I'll learn my frequencies faster. And I really feel like that helped a lot. Kind of, slowly but surely got better and better. And I mean, I didn't get fired, so I definitely was working hard, and things got better. I don't know how long it took, but.
Nice.
I have to piggyback from Philip, being in the right place at the right time, but also taking advantage of those right places at the right time. For me, like everything kind of, I'll say it, Tim, it was luck. Or there was something there that just that made that connection for me.
Absolutely.
But once I got there, you know, I'm young, I'm hungry. I took advantage of it. I listened to the older guys. I mean, still to this day, I still poke my head over someone's shoulder just to see what they're doing. And that's, you know, that's always been my key, having a personal relationship with people. Yes, the skill part, you need it, but, you know, out at front of house, you're dealing with your artist's family, your artist manager, someone from the label. How do you have, you know, a decent conversation with them to not only understand and to, you know, take what they're saying and put it into a musical term, because most of them don't have that musicality, you know, conversation. And how do you translate what they want into, you know, your mix, you know, and keeping everyone happy at the same time. So you can be the most technical person in the world, but if you can't have a conversation, it doesn't matter.
Right. Cool.
I get a lot of kids and parents, well, kind of more parents, that ask me, you know, hey, my son or daughter or cousin or friend wants to enter the live sound industry or touring this or venue that. And what bit of advice do you have? Do we go to college? Do we, you know, not? And my advice, kind of generally speaking, is, you know, go find the rock club in town, the one that's working, and go get a position there, not a job. Do it for free and work another job and don't sleep, and apprentice under the grumpy old jerk, crazy monitor engineer or house guy that's at the venue, and keep the gig for a year. After that, if you've kept the gig for a year, I know you probably understand frequencies and what 1K sounds like when it goes off on stun, or what, you know, 7K sounds like shredding your head out of a wedge. You've also learned how to manage egos. You've kept the job so you haven't pissed off the local guy too bad. And you've also learned how to manage artists of all different bandwidths. At that point, you know what? If you've kept that job for a year, I'll take you out on the ground running, flying PA or something like that, because I know you're not going to be a handful, and I know you get a big picture. You can manage your life. I think a lot of people get that out of college too. I'm not saying don't go to college, but, you know, be present for your life, be present for your gig, show up on time or early. What is it, Tim? If you're on time, you're late. You know, that kind of stuff. All, as with any job, I think that stuff is just as important in this environment and this set of jobs as anywhere else.
Very cool. Good. And thank you. And the next one goes back to the 2 kick drum question, except for, let's imagine you have 2, 3, 1, however many kick drum mics. How do you make the kick and the bass work together? What's the key?
Someone else want this one? Or did I dig myself in a hole?
It's a hole everyone can join themselves in.
I think it depends on the style of music, really. What you're trying to aim for. Is it, you know, disco, rock? You know, there's types of music that lead with the kick drum. There are types of music that lead with the bass.
Definitely.
You know, it's completely down to the style of music. I mean, there are so many types of music now where the kick drum is almost a knocking sound, and the bass is a synth, which is basically a slab of 50 hertz or 60 hertz that's on a sort of a 1 second hold, you know. That's a completely different sort of thing from a rock band where the kick and the bass are meshing together, or you know, disco where the bass is actually more of a note that sits above the kick drum, so it's not actually occupying the same frequency space. But yeah, I mean, understand what you're aiming for before you sort of head in that direction, or you're going to end up digging yourself into a hole where you try and make a funk band sound like a rock band by putting the bass energy in the bass guitar all the way down the bottom and all the way down the bottom in the kick drum. It just won't work.
I think this is a good segue as well for the two kick mics, where we just came from, two kick mic question. Yeah, I'm completely with PJ. Like, you know, some days it works, some days it doesn't, some days it's a phase relationship. So, you know, most of the time I lean on the out instead of the in, but I always do deploy the in. But I'll tell you the time that I use the in the most, I'm in a lot of different style and size venues through the course of a year. It's not always a touring PA. So I'll speak of the like performing arts center or the smaller corporate gig that's, you know, a couple thousand instead of many thousand people, or a couple hundred people instead of 1,000 people. Especially if there's more blue hair in the crowd than there is, you know, brunette and blonde, I will likely typically lean on that inside kick mic with a little bit of the tick and give them the perception of kick drum impact versus gassing them with subs, because that's just not going to help the audience have a good time if that's the demographic. So I also do, you know, for a long time I did a bass mic, amp mic, and a bass DI. I still do the same kind of thing, at least with Lady A, except we've moved over to a tone hammer product instead of the bass amp side. It's an Ampeg amp that's got a direct out, and it's real gritty and mid-rangey, and I've got a bass player that plays, you know, a lot up in here and stringy stuff instead of so much bottom. So it really helps me. I high pass that, give that some upper mid-range stuff, and then leave a little bit of the DI in more of the bottom area, and combine those two tones, kind of like a crossover, if you will.
Yeah, I'd say, so add to that, the idea of having two kick drum mics and two bass sources, doing that, it's a real quick fix to go from, say, I mean, I would say to go from, say, a ballad where you've got a deep bass tone with, you know, finger plucked, and a deep swelling kick drum, and then you switch to a rock track with, you know, the same band. So to go from, for instance, your gritty DI'd sound to the pure low endy thing is just the move of a fader, which will give you that depth on the kick drum and the depth of the bass for the ballad. So, you know, kick out and raw DI for the ballad, and then you get the hacking along rock song. You push up the kick in, which gives you that click, and you push up the gritty DI'd, you know, amp simulator or whatever, and that's a really quick way of changing your mixes, rather than going, oh right, I need more low end in the kick drum now, and dialing on the EQ, and then, oh right, so the bass guitar needs to be a bit more gritty. I'm going to add a bit of low mid and take a bit of low end out. If you have them on separate faders, if you can afford to do that, it's something that we all do in the studio, and in the box these days we mult out the snare drums, say, and have 2 or 3 different versions of the snare for the verse or the chorus, if you get, you know, you're getting into that sort of depth. But yeah, I think that really supports the idea of having multiple sources if you can afford them on the desk.
Completely, because I mean, mixing is fluid. It's not that, okay, this band is playing all these songs, and this is how the bass, this is how the low end and the bass and the kick drum are going to fit together. That's
yeah, exactly. It doesn't.
Of it.
That's not music, is it? That's just sort of technical, or just them playing one song for 90 minutes.
Some bands do, but
some bands make a lot of money doing that.
Exactly.
Okay, great one. This last hour and 5 minutes has flown by, and we've got so many questions, so I'm going to start firing them off. So leaning on that, we've just had one in. So how do you mix low ends? Do you do it on a separate auxiliary, or is it on the main left and right? And is it pre and post if you do it separate? How do you like to control the sub within the mix through the PA? And
I'm often.
do you go on, Brandon?
Yeah, for me, it's often aux. I just find that I have more control over it, especially going from PA to PA, definitely room to room. But some shows you may have 18 subs. Some shows you may only have 8 subs. So for me, it's all about control. I also like to process that aux and limit it, depending on if there isn't a low end. I kind of am a fan of sitting below whatever the house limiter is with some limiter that I'm deploying, and I've gotten really good results from it, and that's just been my way of going. I've dabbled with a matrix fed aux, and it works too. It's just which one you want to go with for that tour or that run.
Okay, cool. Anyone want to add into that?
I would say matrix for subfeed personally. With the new boxes coming out, all these innovations in sound and how things are so much more precise now. You've got high boxes on a line array, for example, that go down to 40 hertz or below, and basically the subs are complement to that. So matrix feed to me, which of course you still have control over the level, seems to work for my purposes as far as phase relationships and how they add together with the main system.
Yeah, matrix for me as well, I'd say, purely because I process the left and right bus compressed, obviously, and then the matrix sub is reflected in the compression level is the same. So yeah,
that's great. And a question about mixing backing tracks. So those of you who have acts that have backing tracks running along, how do you incorporate those into the live mix?
I think there's a lot of components to tracks. We all probably do it different. And professionally, I'd probably love to hear Brandon's answer to this the most, because I feel like, he deals with a lot of that stuff that kind of inspires me on a record level, probably more night to night. My artist is only using the occasional extra BGV stem or an extra mandolin part or some percussion loops, drum loops kind of stuff. So what I request from our tracks guy is that everything gets broken out as wide as I can so that I can manage it later. But we've limited our output package for tracks rigged to 10 channels. So the way the stems, if you will, come to me is I've got a stereo pair that I get stereo BGVs on, stereo strings, stereo really wide stuff, although my show is becoming more and more mono oriented, if you will. And then everything else is a mono track. We also have one mono track that I call bad, and that bad one does not hit my stereo bus, but is available to me for any kind of, I've canned it front of house, but it's good for the monitor for the artists through their in-ears as pitch references for some stuff that happens kind of a cappella, or for some place that there's not a lot of really good melodic or harmonic content for them to latch on to find a pitch. But outside of that, to me, it's all supplemental to the band. I don't lean on any of the track stuff that I'm doing as prime directive like some of these other guys. For me, it's all filler. For me, the rhythm section is a rhythm section, all complementing that vocal, and then tracks are subsidiary to that, except for the occasional drum fill or drum loop stuff that's really driving underneath it all.
Yeah, for me, tracks in my career has been that's been the driving factor of a lot of the artists that I work for. But this last tour that I did, we went from she went from a DJ rig to 10 tracks to I wanted to do Maddie, and so we went full out. We broke everything out, and again, I have the record stuff separately and then all the additional stuff separate, because I want that record to shine. And what I find is that, when stems get printed, they don't have that same impact as, that mastered MP3. And so what I saw in the Q&A, I rely on parallel compression on the tracks, on the stems, just to get it to seem finished. And I've had a lot of good, results with it. If you look at it, it's slamming really hard, but it just, it still breathes with the normal bus, but that parallel compression just, it adds, grit to it, where it sounds like an actual MP3, without being an MP3, but it just hits harder. That's what we miss from a 2-track to stemming it out. I also find that spread on tracks are completely different, like imaging. A lot of the records are super mono, all the elements from the record are super mono, but the additional programming is super wide. And so I want control over that, so it doesn't shift. You're like, it's not wrong, but your brain definitely notices a shift. There was some songs that, some artists I've worked for that their records were from the 90s, and there was a very monocentric stereo image. And then you add the extra stuff, and it's like, we go from here from record and then here for programming. And it's just, how do you get that relationship of imaging together as well?
Great answer. Thank you so much. And I feel remiss if I don't ask this question. Someone is asking, what is your favorite tip or trick that you've developed, or your secret? Is there like a signature thing that you always implement or has become part of your career? So I don't know, maybe a certain sound, or a way you do a reverb or an effect or something. So I'll just jump around each of you there, and I'll start with Snake on that one, I think.
Dynamic EQ. I bought a 901 when it was like, I think I had number 11. It was like a revelation to me when the dynamic EQ came out on the vocal. And it's been the same since whatever, flavor you take, controlling, and I use them on the mix as well. I think controlling the upper mid-range in pop is paramount. In most things, really, because things get really aggressive at between 2 and 4K, say. And to me, it's dynamic EQ there. So, not just compression of the master bus, but actually dipping out. So when the volume comes up and it starts to pin you, it doesn't hurt. That's been my trademark. People say to me, "You've got that so loud, but it doesn't hurt me, and I can hear everything that's going on stage." And you go, yeah, okay. So, and I've stopped thinking about it now, but that's for me, that's the thing. I hate 3K5, 3K. I mean, it rattles my brain. So, and I think part of my sound came from that hatred of that particular frequency. But you need that frequency.
2.5 for me.
2.5, yeah, similar area, yeah,
definitely.
I hate that.
But, that developed my sound to the point where before I used dynamic EQs, I'd have the grab graphic, and in the chorus, I'd like literally rip 2K5 or 3K15 down to the floor and push the master, so you'd get this impact, but it didn't grab you, didn't make it gnarly, and then the verse come back in quietly, and I'd ease that frequency band back up. So yeah, that's my original, and I end up with a little ski jump.
Brilliant. Let's jump to Scoop. Fantastic. Thank you.
I'd probably say that my trademark, if you will, or things that people comment on the most, is either vocal blend or drum sounds. And for me, once again, it comes back to that management of the 330 through 500 in my principal male lead vocal and the snare drum. I definitely grew up mixing on SSL 4000s in the studio, and I am still a 4000 bus compressor guy on my output, and I'm a 4000 channel strip guy on my snare drum, and I'm not scared of that compression factor at all, and embrace it quite abundantly. On top of that, to the 2.5, I'll say 2.7 range as well. A funny brief story. It was 2010. I was out with a great system tech, one of the best ever, who's probably online right now. And he said, why after this time of the show every night do you pull 2/5 in the third octave? He goes, every night you do it right between this song and this song. And it wasn't like during a song, it was right between. And I said, I don't know that I do that. Why don't you point it out to me the next night and I'll share with you what's going on in my head. And so he did. And I realized, you know what, at that point in the evening, I want a little relief in that area to kind of pull me through. That's where my ears are starting to get fatigued. So I would pull that 2.5, 3K range just ever so slightly, maybe some nights depending on SPL overall, but pull that frequency a little bit just to, I guess technically it's maybe a synthetic loudness curve idea, moving throughout the course of the show. I don't have to gas it any harder, but I get that perception of some of that psychoacoustic energy on the back end. So between snare drum, that kind of management and the top end, and doubler on the vocal, on the BGVs for sure, especially in and out of courses. I'm on that fader all night long. A nice Cooper Time Cube kind of vibe back there. That's probably my vibe.
Nice. I would definitely agree with Snake as far as the dynamic EQ. When I discovered that, it was a whole ocean of possibilities opened up. And I don't use it on the mix so much, but can't really, at least it seems like these days, I can't really do a vocal without it. Whether it's when a vocalist is singing softly, all the chesty low mids come up, which need a little bit of attenuation. And then when they really belt it out, it starts cutting in the 3K 1.5 range, which is definitely my the one that bugs me. Getting kicked in the ears by Mr. Fletcher, Mr. Munson. Especially the louder the volume goes. And also Scoop has a great point where with Lord, for vocal impact and choruses, doubler. It's all about the doubler. Take it off on the verses. She's telling a story, and then when the chorus hits, boom, you've got the doubling supporting her.
I guess I'm gonna have to copy everyone else. Dynamic EQ or dynamic compression. You don't have to chase that EQ all day, especially with, for me with rappers or their vocals are all over the place. They're cupping the mic, they're not cupping the mic. I prefer not to chase EQs. With also using parallel compression, not just on the tracks, but I sometimes do a parallel compression of the vocal. It just thickens it up. It adds some grit. Just something. There's something there if you do it right. When you dig into it and then make it up, it adds something. I think for me, the key to my mixing is it starts with correcting the PA in the room. It's not the most flashy part. It's not the cool part, but I think without a good PA with it being in time, I see a lot of engineers who they'll go down in flames. They may have a great mix, but that PA that night they didn't time align it properly.
That's the most important part for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've done some shows where the other engineer is running out of PA and they're quieter than I am, and it's like, yeah, all of my speakers are in time. It's not that it's wrong, not that the house, or the local gave me a bad PA. It's just my relationship between all of them. So that science part mixed with the creative part just meshes so well together. And I think, sometimes people don't want to dig into it, but we don't always get a good SE, Scoop. So
amazing, fantastic, great answers. And then I guess we've only got 10 minutes left, and there's been so many people asking, but the main topics have been reverbs, compression, and time alignment. So I'll let you all choose which one you'd like to address, because I think we'll only have one more. We'll only have time to go around one more time. So I'm going to start with you, PJ, on time alignment. But if one of you other guys want to pick up one of the topics that maybe we haven't covered, that would be useful to the viewers, that'd be great. So PJ, time alignment.
Very sensitive subject. No, it's this is where the art form comes into play, because of course sound propagation is time dependent, and where your speakers are placed, it differs with frequency. So, you know, with subwoofer tuning, front field tuning to the main PA, you pop a mic in one spot, you say, oh, got my readout, I'm on smart, this is the correct delay time, this is all good. Doesn't actually work when you go 3-4 meters back, put the mic in the same place, and you'll get a completely different different readouts. So what really needs to be thought about is the relationship of basically frequencies, how they relate to each other, and where they overlap. So, you know, again, with modern line arrays that go down to 40 hertz, there's basically a lot of place where you kind of need to pick a spot where you want the overlap and the reinforcement. Depends on your low frequency contour curve, you know, if you're and what frequency you want highlighted. I was hoping you'd say reverb, Andy, so I could say impulse response reverbs all day, all night. But yeah, time alignment that's where an amazing system tech really does a great job, because I mean, the size of these systems, when you go from a stadium, you know, with delay towers, and this all has to be aligned. And basically, you know, there's a lot of technology that you know, you pump equations into that work it all out and give you the best results. But still, there is you know, it's not exactly equal when you're talking frequencies and positions in a room. So you know, Bob McCarthy, who wrote a book that you know, should definitely be looked at if you're interested in live sound, talks about wavelengths, and it's basically how wavelengths interact with frequency. So he says you go from fingernails to shipping containers, meaning that you know, 16K is about as wide as your pinky fingernail, but shipping containers is the size of one wavelength of 16 hertz or 20 hertz or something. And so when you are taking measurements for time alignment, you have to keep these things in mind, and where you are, you know, where you're going to make the measurement and pick up on the, you know, and apply it, really, I guess.
That's a great tip. That's a great book as well. I remember reading that when I was at uni. Blew my head off.
Yeah, no,
I'm gonna, yeah, it's a great book. So I'm going to jump to Snake for top tips on compression.
Top tips. Well, compression's not only a dynamic choice; it's also an artistic choice, and you have to think about this style of music again. It all comes down to listening to musically. If you're using a lot of compression on, say, a folk band, then you're probably doing something a little bit wrong. You have, obviously, you know, people develop their own styles. I mean, Chris Lord-Alge, you know, everything's compressed to buggery, excuse my French. And he would say the same thing. And, you know, he uses those boxes a lot of the time as distortion boxes, because when you hit a compressor really, really hard, you know, you get artifacts. And some things like, you know, an 1176 being hit in a certain way makes a vocal stand up in a mix. And it's more about the distortion. So, you know, I would say don't think of compression as just a way of controlling dynamics. Think about it in relation to the music that you're trying to put across, basically. There are no hard and fast rules. I think in pop you're more likely to use a lot of compression, but not necessarily. I think don't overcompress, especially if you have a loud stage or a quiet vocalist. Again, you know, goes back to the vocals. If you're going to compress a very quiet vocalist, even on a stage with no amplification, then you can run into trouble. You'll end up sucking back the PA or the drum kit or whatever. So use it, understand it, and understand what you're trying to do with it, actually. It doesn't matter if every single channel is compressed with 6 or 8 dB of compression on every single channel all of the time, as long as you know why you're doing it. So
that's a great tip. And I'm going to jump to Scoop for a reverb. The reverb.
So as a general rule, I depending on venues, right? This is all venue and artist specific. So please hear what I'm saying, kind of generally speaking. But as a general rule, I'm a plate reverb drum guy. It's just kind of how I've always been around. I'll probably always use a plate reverb on a snare drum and toms. That's probably a jam. Vocal reverbs, I think, are kind of, I try to do something that fits the flavor of space that I'm in. Typically, I know some guys do, you know, a general reverb that they statically change from night to night if the venue's different. I automate verbs every night, or all of my verbs follow the snapshots. So for a ballad, I'll probably have a longer, generally concert hall kind of vibe, vocal verb that changes decay times, pre-delays, you know, for more pre-delay for a ballad, longer decay time, pop stuff, shorter decay time, less pre-delay. That's kind of the first 2 faders in my FX bucket, if you will. I do my doubler on 3. I do a long delay on 4, tap delay. I do a short delay that's also a tap that's kind of a slap echo as my second delay. But notably, I wanted to bring up in Verbland, I have a solo fader that catches guitar solo verb. So sometimes when electric guitar player, stage right or stage left will play and they'll really dive bomb into a solo, especially on the outro of a solo, I'll ease that reverb fader in on my solo reverb return. And I have another reverb fader that I use when one of my electric guitar players, I have electric guitar player stage right and left, and often my stage left electric player will play auxiliary stuff, so mando, banjo, that kind of stuff. So my scene automation takes my stage right electric player and spreads him a little bit more across the mix, but the space channel I have is a discrete reverb. So it's 2 inputs to the reverb and 2 outputs to the reverb, but the left side stays coming out the left and the right side stays coming out the right. That reverb, then when I push that space fader, for reverb return, when I push that fader, I get this, what sounds like a microphone about 6 feet in front of a piece of plywood in a bathroom. And that little bit of space on the opposite side of where I have the electric guitar player playing is just enough to kind of satisfy this area over here that's now missing that big rhythmic electric part, and kind of does more of a Allman Brothers or Leonard Skinner kind of vibe. Not to bring up a Cooper time cube again, but that kind of vibe. So that's the use of verb, drum verb, vocal verb. Don't be afraid to tune your verb. I definitely have plenty of instances where there's a 400 push or a 500 push or a 400 or 500 deficit or a high pass in a verb or a low pass in a verb, or and the verb effect itself, I'll attenuate the top for a particularly sibilant vocal area on maybe that song. So don't be afraid to dive into that. But to what PJ and Steve were saying, or and Snake were saying, know what you're doing in those places. You know, don't jump into the next snapshot that you've been building in rehearsals and be like, oh man, I've really attenuated all of the low mid in this reverb return. Why are things getting thin and swimmy up top?
Hey, Scoop, let me ask you on that, because I found something not too long ago. Well, it's been a while ago. My concept of time, I guess, is off these days. But of EQing before it gets to the verb, I've been EQing the send lately and having a lot of success in cleaning things up rather than the output. I just wonder if you guys are trying that too.
I actually do that sometimes in my a stereo bus, but just a very light. For example, I told you I'm a 4K mixer. I mix with a 4K G bus, which gives it up really nice in that same 300s area that I've been talking about the whole often today. So sometimes, depending on how I negotiate this, I have a band VCA. So sometimes I'll just push the band VCA a little bit more and drive a little bit harder into that bus compressor for some of this thing. But if I'm at that corporate show where I'm leaning on the inside kick mic, for example, I have an EQ, one filter EQ just before my bus compressor, where I will occasionally do a little dip there, just depending on, so I play with how I'm hitting that compressor, which applies to that same function. I think play with how you're hitting the verb and what the verb's doing versus what the verb's doing on the back end. I think it can be negotiated either way. Great point.
Yeah, 100% for me,
cool.
Tim. That's exactly what I like to do.
Amazing. And I'd like to, I know we've gone a little bit over time here, but I'd feel guilty if I didn't ask Branden for his, do you want to jump in on any of those 3 points there?
I'll go time-align, because that's kind of my thing. That's the key to it for me. That mix curve, that target curve, and time aligning is the key to mixing a show for me. We did a festival in Atlanta, and our control didn't get there in time, but I happened to know the systems engineer, and I asked him, could I just tune the PA? Could I just see what it's doing on your rig, and then I'll copy all your EQs into mine. No sound check, line check, and hit it. Didn't even hear the vocal in the PA, and it sounded what I was used to. That same night, someone else went up after, and they're into compression, and I'm just like, and they're, and like I said, they're 2 or 3 dB louder than 2 or 3 dB quieter than I am, and I'm just like, that relationship is the key. Not to say that the SE was bad, but again, what I have going on my master bus and my aux fed bus, that relationship needs to be put again back into the PA. And so that's, that's the key to me. I live by it. I'd rather do that, but I'd rather do that while the monitor engineer is line checking. That's why it's just so important to me.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. There's a few people asking about that book that PJ brought up. It's just Bob McCarthy. He's written quite a few, but if you just go to Bob McCarthy Audio, his books are on there. I just want to say thank you so much, guys. I've learned a lot. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for the time. I want to be respectful because we've gone over a little bit. I'm going to let Tim wrap up there, but thank you from me. That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple final things before we do the wrap here. I want to give each of you a final segment to say anything that we've missed, something quick you might want to say about what you're doing yourselves or anything like that. And in that, I have one final question that we all will love, and is that, do you miss analog consoles? Which I just got that one. I miss them. And then I'll wrap up after that. So just one quick round with everyone. Anything we missed? Anything you'd like to say? And do you miss analog?
I'll start.
That's going to take another half hour.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, in just a couple seconds. We could go forever.
So somebody mentioned the 400B earlier. I think it was at UPJ. Yeah. What an awesome sounding desk. 800B as well. Not a surprise. So yes, I think that all of us have some grins on our faces when it comes to, goody at the end of a head amp or beyond unity on a fader. You know what? There's a lot of great ways to get color, and technology has come along so far, especially just in the last couple of years with mixed field and depth. So do I miss analog? Yeah, there's still a rack of analog stuff at my place, especially on the input side. I guess that answers your question, Tim. And I wanted to also say at the end of this, if anybody out there on whatever level, I can't field a ton of questions, but if you populate my Instagram DM box at Brett's Place Productions, I happily and welcomely engage forward conversation and questions. It's always a learning opportunity for me too. So feel free to look me up on Instagram, Brett Scoop Blanden, or Brett's Place Productions on Instagram. I'd be happy to field the occasional response to a DM on Insta.
Thank you, Brett. Brandon?
Piggyback what Scoop said, everyone loves analog. I personally didn't grow up in that stage, that time of, but I always carry an Avalon 737 preamp. That's my baby. So I love my analog gear. I probably won't ever get rid of it. But I will say, to those people who are just starting out, don't compare yourself to other people's timelines. For myself, I thought, I wanted to be a systems engineer, and I thought it would take 20 plus years to, doing that and to then become a mixer. But again, staying hungry and taking advantage of every opportunity that comes your way, you get to be places where you've worked and earned to get there. And then lastly, I would just say, treat everyone, kindly. You never know when, that stage left PA tech ends up being the biggest production manager or artist manager out there. And, he's looking for a front of house mixer. So treat everyone kind, and, same thing as Scoop, Brandon Blackwell 23 on LinkedIn or on Instagram. I'm always chatting with people, so don't hesitate to reach out. We got plenty of time now, so so yeah.
Yes, we do. All right, thank you, Brandon. Snake, I see you're already unmuted. I'll go to you next.
Okay, so love it or leave. That's one thing, and enjoy the ride. Don't be afraid to take risks. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that you can gate reverbs on the in and on the out, being as I work for a big 80s band still. And do I miss analog?
I have a quick question.
Oh,
Big
yeah,
Duran
go ahead,
fan.
yeah.
Big Duran fan. Do you gate on the aux send side or on the verb return side?
It depends. Usually the return, but gated, key gated. So the return gated from the source. So yeah. And do I miss analog? God, I don't, because I've found a way pretty much of making analog sound in the box. There are so many great plugins and emulations out there. I'm massive. I grew up on the 4K SSL and the Midas XL4 and the XL3 before that, and I love that, but there are ways of doing that now. I miss the immediacy of dialing stuff, but I don't miss the, wishing that I could do this from one song to the next, because that's all there now. You can build a complete mix of every single song without constraint and go, this song needs to sound like this song wants to sound like this, and you can treat it that way, and it's brilliant. So I'm 20 years into automation now, so I love the sound, but there are ways of getting it, or at least a good approximation in the digital domain now. So that's me.
Very good. Thank you, Snake.
And piggybacking on what Snake says, yeah, love it or leave it, really. To succeed, you need to have drive, you need to have perseverance. It's not about having a stellar show every night, and it's about communicating and being open. And to this day, after all the years of sound engineering, more often than not, I think probably every night, I walk away with learning something new. And my take on this has always been that if you stop learning, then it's time to do something else. And there's so much creativity and science and so much to me that's inspiring about this profession. And I mean, just being able to control something as ethereal as sound, and at least not even controlling it, just kind of, pointing it in the direction that you think it should go, I think has a lot of fundamental, intuitive aspects that are really powerful. On a cellular level to, mystical level, if you will. As far as the analog versus digital, or missing analog, I don't miss analog when it's time for recall. Otherwise, yeah, no. We're still using a XL4 with my buddy Valentine every night, and you can actually program some scenes with mutes and sends on that desk, but it's painful. Digital, it is amazing what you can accomplish, especially as Snake iterated from song A to B, hard hitter to a ballad or something. It's how quick and different you can have things sound just at a push of the button. I would love to say that kind of as a detriment, when in the analog days, if you had a really good looking front of house rack and it had some distressors and 1176s and 901s, you would have to choose which of your 42 channels you would use these components on. So it's not like a digital desk where you have, hey, I can have an 1176 on every channel. It's going to sound great.
Overuse.
Yeah. I think that it's kind of come around as a detriment in a way, because I mean, just thinking about all the amazing records in the 60s and 70s where they were truly defined by limitations, and some of these multi-tracks that have been leaked out of like Queen songs, for example, where a single track has the guitar solo, backing vocals, and keyboards all on one track, which took meticulous planning and decision making.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I really, it's a difficult situation because digital is so powerful. It exceeds limitation practically, and which can get you into a lot of trouble because you can overuse everything that's at your fingertips. But maybe we should end on a positive note. But thank you guys. I really enjoyed sharing the panel with you.
No, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and I'd really like to thank David and Kevin, who are working in the background with the Sound Academy team, for managing all the questions that are coming in. Guys, you're the invisible unsung heroes here. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Andy for helping me host, and all of you panelists, and all of the people who came to watch this session today. Again, we're the Sennheiser Relationship Management team, the education series from Sennheiser Sound Academy. And thank you for watching. We really do appreciate it. The next sessions will be on House of... And I think I went away there for a second. But we have a House of Worship session and some theater sessions coming up. So watch the site, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you guys.
Thanks all.
Cheers.